get Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. He served in the Air Force in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, you've been following ISIS closely. Yeah. What do you make of the right now, the inspection, I guess the IG checking in to see whether the Pentagon's exaggerated success against ISIS?
Yeah, we need to find that out. I mean, you know, this is kind of an issue you run into sometimes with the Pentagon, with leadership, is they're sometimes eager to either please the president, or sometimes the president can even influence them to say we need better numbers so we can please the public.
You know, I was on armed services. That was one of the great shocks, is when I figured out that generals and admirals were like more political than everybody else.
They're politicians sometimes. You know, at the end of the day, look, we've been bombing ISIS now for over a year, and so if you ask
what have we got? What have we got?
That's the question. Where are we? And you probably could have. We've stopped, I'm sure, some expansion. I'm not saying that this is the wrong thing to do.
Right.
But if you look at it and you say any other president, I think, frankly, had this been a year where we're still bombing ISIS with no real success, there'd be.
Have we made any gains at all?
I mean, to an extent. Anytime sounds harsh to say, but it's true. Anytime you kill bad people, you're gaining. Now, the problem is, how are you stopping the next generation? How are you stopping? I mean, really, the issue comes down to Syria, and nobody's talking about the fact Bashar al-Assad is the incubator of ISIS. And, you know, 4 years ago, the president said they're a bunch of doctors and lawyers. And the doctors and lawyers were the ones poised to take over after Bashar al-Assad. Right. Today, it's ISIS, it's Jabhat al-Nusra, and it's just getting worse.
Where are we just as far as territory control? Does ISIS control more territory or less territory? About the same as they did a year ago?
I'm going to say it's probably about the same as a year ago. They've made expansions in certain areas. They've had rollbacks in other areas. Yeah. But really, if you look at where ISIS is today, it's in a much worse situation because Syria, Iraq, everything else.
I'm going to ask you a political question.
Sure.
You were one of the first endorsers of Jeb Bush.
Yeah.
He has been taking to a frontal assault on Donald Trump over the course of the last week or so. How do you think that's going?
You know, look, it's a start. I mean, there's really two ways to come to power. One is through negativity, you know, reinforcing to Americans, hey, the economy stinks, your leaders stink, everything else, right? It's kind of stirring that anger part of people. Or 1979, Ronald Reagan won the presidency not by reinforcing to people how bad the economy was under Carter, but by talking about this idea of a shining city on a hill and inspiring people. That's what I think the job of a president is to do, is to lay out a roadmap for people to say, look, it's not necessarily me, but here's where we need to go. So is it a start? Probably. Has it been overly effective? Maybe not yet, but I think Jeb's the guy.
But a lot of people look at Governor Bush and say he does not have the optimism, the joy, he looks uncomfortable, unhappy, kind of put upon.
Let me break through this. He looks dull and joyless and awkward. What say you?
Well, look, I don't think he is. If you get to know Jeb and
well, we can't.
As you get to
because he looks dull and joyless and awkward.
I think he's.
I know. Listen, I know Jeb. I like Jeb.
This is not what we're talking
about. But this Jeb is in black and white. Everybody else is in color. So what's going on?
We saw a piece of Jeb that I think he needs to bring out, and I think he's going to.
Yes, with the wall.
And no, when he talked about, for instance, when he talked about in the debate, and I was in the front row of the debate, when he talked about education. You know, look, foreign policy is important. I'm a foreign policy guy. I think it's important to talk about. But when he rolled into education and talked about the optimism in the next generation and frankly, how the greatest way to come out of being in poverty or to go to the next class is through education, we saw an aspect of that in him. That's what he needs to grab onto and I think be much more public with. But right now, Donald Trump's sucking all the oxygen out of the room. I mean, any candidate running for president right now has got to be frustrated because everything's Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump.
Yeah, you know, we like cranky Jeb. We love when the guy said, they built the wall in China. He's like, yeah. 600 years ago. That's the Jeb I know and love.
I think you're going to see some of that Jeb coming out. Some of the frustrated Jeb.
Come on, Jeb.
Actually, the frustrated Jeb works well. He's a smart guy.
He's funny and
he's got cutting humor, and I think people would love to see that.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, he hasn't been on the campaign trail for a decade. This is new. I mean, if I take a month off of the campaign trail, I come back and I'm kind of rusty. Imagine 10 years. And I think for 10 years he's doing well, but it's a long
Well, Donald Trump has never been on the campaign trail.
No?
Donald Trump's
been
campaigning for 50 years.
But if you listen to what Donald Trump says, he doesn't really say anything. It's the tone, and people like the tone, and I guess he's tapping into some anger people have, but you listen to him, and it really makes no sense when I listen to what he says. I'm going to make Mexico pay for the wall. How? I'm going to make him.
But how does he break through?
Military or what?
How does Jeb break through in an era when rage and anger and tone are what's happening in politics right now?
I think that's the big question. you know, from my end, I want to be the kind of leader that's not a yeller, that's not a screamer, that tries to inspire people to something bigger.
Yeah.
I think ultimately that's going to win. I mean, I really do.
All right, I just fell asleep.
Congressman,
I'm
listen.
sorry. Okay, Congressman.
Listen, Congressman, I just want you to know, don't worry about what you just said. We're going to call President Trump and tell him you're an okay guy.
Understood.
Congressman
Don't
Kinzinger,
worry,
thank you so much. Coming up next.